Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Clouser, and welcome back to the Journey of My Mother's Son podcast. I'm joined with author, master NLP practitioner, and coach June K. Collins. June, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Looking forward to the conversation. But before we get started, just introduce yourself in your own words. Who is June today?
Today, I'm an author. I'm a mother. I help other women with child loss on a daily basis, and I basically deal with my child loss on a daily basis. Um, I have many dogs. I live in the country. I just, I'm me, I guess, an introvert, as we talked about. So yeah, so that's kind of me in a nutshell. I have a little daughter now. She keeps me busy with different things, and then, like I said, I help other mothers with child loss, and that's I have a husband, and that's about me in a nutshell, I guess you could say.
Yeah, love it. So, obviously, I'm going to want to talk about the book a little bit, but before we get to that, let's talk about what got you to the point of being an author. And you mentioned it in your introduction. You lost a child at a very young age. Just tell me a little bit about that. That experience, what it was like for you, and how you're continuing to kind of to grow through it. Because I think a lot of times people talk about grief as something that you get through, and I don't think you ever get through grief. I think grief is just a constant journey, a constant evolution of how we're dealing with it. You can never really get over it. So just tell me a little bit about your journey through grief and losing a child at such a young age.
Sure. So, back in 2009, I decided that I was going to have children, and I ended up having a son. And when I had him, I actually had a complete placental abruption. And basically, when I finally had him, they had to do an emergency C-section, and I had lost 3.5 pints of blood. And obviously, when you have a placental abruption, the baby's not breathing. So he actually had a lot of brain damage because of it, and he had like cerebral palsy, microcephaly, he had a seizure disorder, and just different things he had with him. So we had an actual special needs child. We kind of went on like that until 2012. We had to take shifts with him because he would wake up several times during the night. And he would have to be fed because he had to have a feeding tube. And so we would take shifts. We called it shift work. And so one night I woke up in 2012, March 20th of 2012, I woke up to my husband at the time screaming. And when I came running downstairs, I asked him what was wrong. And he said that Kaleb wasn't breathing, which is my son. And I guess my mind couldn't wrap around what he was telling me because I asked him, I said, "Are you kidding?" And he said no. And I ran downstairs and dialed 911 because where we live, if you dial 911 and don't answer, um, they still come. They'll still send the police. And that's just the way they do it here. So I dialed 911, threw down the phone, and I grabbed him off the bed and I started CPR. Obviously, we both were trained before we could leave the NICU with Kaleb. And so I was doing CPR on Kaleb, and I asked Brian to go, my ex-husband, to go do the phone. And anyway, I did CPR until EMS arrived. And once EMS arrived, they obviously took him to the hospital. And there was a lot of things going on with that. So I worked for a drug task force at the time. I'm actually in law enforcement. And so we had to wait for an investigator. And whenever in my town where we're from, if an investigator has to come out, that means a child passed away. And it's something that's not spoken about to the parents. But obviously, me knowing and me saying that to different people, different parents, I knew what was going on. I knew my son had passed away. Obviously, my husband at the time didn't, and my dad, who had made his way down to our house, because we live on a compound, is what we called it. Um, anyway, I knew what was going on. Obviously, they didn't. I talked to the cops about it that had come out because I knew all of them. And we finally, basically, since I knew them all, they let me write a note saying, "Hey, you guys can stay in my house." So we can go to the hospital. And Alicia, the investigator, was going to meet us at the hospital because I knew her too. And so she was going to meet us at the hospital. And when we got there, when we finally got to the hospital, well, before then, when we were driving there, I had a bunch of things going in my head. And I actually told my husband at the time, I was like, when we get to the hospital, it might not be that good. And he was like, no, it's going to be fine. You basically need to be positive. So I kind of shut my mouth until we got to the hospital. And when we got to the hospital, we went inside and we were asking for my son, and I heard them call my name. Someone called my name, and I turned around. And it was another cop that I had worked with, and I told him that they had brought in Kaleb, and he knew. And he took us to a private room, and we sat there and we waited for the doctor and the chaplain. Well, I knew we were waiting for the doctor and chaplain, and they came in and they told us that my son had passed away, that they had done everything they could, but he had passed away. So that kind of is what kickstarted my journey with child loss. And it's been a long journey. Obviously, I got divorced from my husband. There's a whole lot of things that go into child loss and divorce. And then I can remember sitting on my couch one day, and it was probably about a year into my child loss, and I was like, I'm 31 years old. I was about 32. I don't want to live like this for the rest of my life. I'm only 31 years old, and I had got to that place, that rock bottom where it was, I'm not going to commit suicide, but I am in a dark place where if I died, I'd be okay with it. And, I was okay with that at the time, but, looking back at it now, it's like, dang, I was really in a dark place. But I had just reached that point. And at that point, I was like, I'm not going to live like this for the rest of my life. But me being an introvert, I didn't want to go to counseling. I didn't want to go to group therapy where my anxiety would be on all these people around me versus my health. So instead of doing that, I decided at first I was going to put all these things on my plate, and I started taking my master's degree in forensic psychology. And I kind of pushed my grief to the back of my back of my mind. And once I started taking the forensic psychology and learning about the mind, that's when I was like, okay, I can do this, because it's all, and I say this lightly, but it's kind of like a mind game. You have to rewire your brain and the way of thinking. And the first thing that I really had to do was figure out who I was, because I thought that when I went through this loss, I thought I could go back to the way things were. Obviously, it wouldn't have been with my son, but I thought that for some reason I thought that I could go back to the way things were, the person I was, and everything like that. And what I had to realize was I was a different person. My morals, my values, my beliefs, everything was changing. And, I was going to be a different person. And once I figured out who I was as a person and realized that I think there's like this thing with grief that everybody goes, you're going to heal one day. And I really, and I talk about it a lot. Henceforth, why my book is named Momma, You Don't Heal. I don't think you heal. I think you learn how to deal with it in your own way. And some of us deal with it in negative ways, and some of us deal with it in positive ways. But after I finally learned what worked for me, and I learned about more and more about the mind, I started to take steps forward to rebuild my life. And I think one of the biggest things that I struggled with also was I thought, if I move forward, then I'm forgetting my son. And that played like a huge, huge role in my journey as well, going through it. And then obviously when my daughter was born, there was a there was a whole lot of more stuff, because I am super um protective of her. I have to kind of check myself on that, because I'm so scared that I was going to lose her in the first 2.5 years of her life. She's 9 now, but I'm still working on the protection thing, because I don't want her to do anything. So I don't want her to get hurt, and I don't want her to go away. But in the first, months that I had her, it was really rough for me. And right before, about the same time that I had the placenta abruption with Kaleb, I started having all this stuff, as I call it, come up for her, and she was a healthy child too, and you know, she's my opposite of what Kaleb was. But so I had to deal with some things there. But I think with the grief that you feel for your child, you're also having to deal with. I was also dealing with, I don't like the person that I was when I look back at who I was. So I was also dealing with that stuff too. But I don't know, that's a long version of kind of where I started.
No, I think that's great. And I mean, I can only imagine when, you found out you're going to have another child, just some of the emotions that went along with that. Knowing that you had a complicated pregnancy and then, 2.5 years later lost your child. So I mean, just what were some of those emotions like? I mean, I know you said you had a lot of stuff, but can we unpack that a little bit more? I mean,
Yeah.
what that was like as far as, you know, venturing back into motherhood almost?
hmm So obviously Kaleb was my only child. So there's a whole bunch of stuff with that too. So, but he, when I had him, obviously at 5 weeks before he was supposed to be born, is when I started having all the problems. So, Bella, my daughter, she was not expected. We weren't trying to get pregnant or anything like that, which probably was the best thing that could have happened. Because I say she was my savior. But when I first found out I was pregnant, I had a lot of anxiety going on with me, just because, oh my gosh, is it going to happen again? But I started to calm down. But about the same time, I started having the problems with Kaleb, with the high blood pressure and the, pre-diabetic stuff and everything like that. Preeclampsia, I started freaking out again because of the fact that it's going down the same path. I'm going into preterm labor, or before, going into labor, and oh my gosh, I'm not supposed to. So I started having a lot of anxiety with that. And the time that they put me in the hospital, they were doing stress tests on me and stuff like that, if you know anything about that. But they put me in the hospital and they wanted to monitor me for a few hours, and that's exactly what they did the day before I had my complete placental abruption with Kaleb. And I told my new husband at the time, I was like, I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving. This isn't going to happen again. And there was a nurse that was actually at the hospital that was really, like, we were telling her what happened with Kaleb. And I don't know if because she was a mom, she felt bad for me or what, but she was like, we're going to have your son tonight. Or excuse me, you were going to have your daughter tonight. And I'm like, okay, didn't know what she meant, but I ended up having my daughter that night, or later on that evening. Um, but it was a lot of anxiety and a lot of I could have swore I was having a heart attack. You know what I mean? Just like I was like, I can't do this again. I can't go through this again. I can't lose her. And then when I did have her, after that night, after we had her, I can remember them bringing her to me and feeling really standoffish with her. My own child, I was very standoffish with her because I was like, I don't want to fall in love with this child again and then this child be taken away from me. And obviously it lasted about a week with her, doing little cute baby things that they do. But I remember feeling that. And obviously for a long time I felt guilty because I felt like that, but it was just all part of it. And I remember finally we got into a routine, but I can remember crying, and I think it was part of that postpartum stuff too. But I can remember crying to my husband, and I was like, I'm worried that God's going to take her away from me too. And he was like, June, I don't think that he would ever do that to you again. You can't think like that. And he was trying to be positive, but like for me, that was like the worst thing, like if I love this child again and then she's taken away from me, what am I going to do? I don't think I could do it again. And I still don't think I could do it again, but anyway, and then it started to get easier, and then when she got to be about 2, I started getting the anxiety really, really bad again because all I could think of is she's going to die well, Kaleb was like 2 years old, 3 months, and some days old. But all I could think about at 2, when she turned 2, was, oh my God, it's getting ready to happen again. It's getting ready to happen again. I'm getting ready to lose her. And I was a basket case, and obviously she doesn't remember that, but my husband very well remembers that, you know. But I finally, once the 2.5 passed, you know, it kind of subsided and stuff. But even having her now, I have to be more willing to open up and let her be a kid. You know, I still struggle with that a lot, and I do better, but I can remember me, I still do it sometimes, but like in early ages, I can remember her going to the movies with her grandmother, or her going and staying at my parents' house, for, you know, a couple hours because we had to go do something, and having that anxiety. I've gotten better with that now, but even when I leave her now, I don't want to leave her, you know. And I think that's partially because of my grief, and partially from being in law enforcement, because, you know, you see the ugly side of people. And unfortunately you get that negative, you know, you see a real ugly side of people. But yeah, I struggle daily with it still. I don't think that I'll ever totally get over it. I just have to be willing to let her do the things that I'm worried about, you know. And I do, and I think the way for me to deal with that is, what I usually do is find something to do when she goes and does these things, you know. And then that kind of helps me take my mind off of just constantly sitting there and worrying.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, I'm sure it's just a constant journey for you to, to get through that, and just, kind of a daily back and forth to deal with it. So what was it that got you to a point, um, you know, again, as you mentioned before, you never really heal from it, but, now, you've decided to be a coach to help, other mothers dealing with their loss, and then later on, you know, decided to become an author to write about it, and to, put that journey on paper to help others as well. What was it that triggered you wanting to help others who are dealing with the same pain?
Sure. So, obviously I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram too, but I'm on Facebook, and I have like a lot of friends on Facebook, even before the group started and all of that. And I can remember being on Facebook, and Laura is one of the mothers. She lost her son. And I can remember just feeling like I needed to contact her and let her know that she's not alone, and that there's many of us out here. And I think that was my biggest thing at first, was I just felt like the urge to let them know, hey, look, you're not alone. You're going to be okay. And I started at first reaching out to people I knew, and telling them, hey, I'm here if you just want to talk. If you just, you know, want to be on the phone and not say anything, or if you just want me to come sit with you, we don't have to talk. We can just sit. I just wanted them to know that I was here for them. And I started like that. It was just like an urge I wanted to. And then obviously you have your friends on Facebook, and then their friends on Facebook. And sometimes they post saying, you know, such and such lost a child, and please pray for them, or whatever they're saying. And I just felt the urge to contact them. They didn't know me, but I was just like, hey, how are you doing? You know, I lost my child too. And I was very open with them, and they would ask questions about child loss. And some of them would just say thank you, but some of them would ask questions. And sometimes right then wasn't the time for them to talk, but they would contact me weeks later. And you know, we would talk, and I made friends that way. And that's just, I just felt an urge. It wasn't anything more than just an urge. And that's kind of how I started helping women. And then after I would help them, you know, and I don't consider that I did much to them. I just said, hey, I'm here. Yes, I lost my child too. You're not alone in this. There's many of us out here. If you want to talk or just sit and not say anything, I'm here. And people would tell me, you know, that meant something, you know, that made a difference. And I'm like, I didn't do anything, you know, I just let you know that you're not alone. But I think especially how the life cycle goes, and how, you know, we're raised to think that, you know, life goes a certain way. And when you take that piece out, everybody thinks that it kind of shakes things up. And people that haven't lost children don't understand, and they're kind of shy away from talking about it a lot. And then the people that have lost children, they don't want to upset the people that, have never gone through it. So they think that they have to be alone in it, and they have to close off, and they have to keep it up in a little chest and not say anything. And I think that that's it's wrong. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of us out here, and there's siblings that are dealing with it, and husbands that are dealing with it, and women that are dealing with it. But I think it's just so taboo that nobody wants to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just, you had said you didn't think you really did anything, but I think it's so important for so many people just to understand that they aren't alone. That there
Mhm.
are people that are going through that. Um, did you ever have anybody that reached out to you that made an impact?
Yeah, so I was working for a drug task force at the time, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the GBI in my area, ran that task force, and they had what was called peer support. They still have it. A lot of police departments have it now. And I wanted to go back to work right away because I didn't want to think about my grief. And so I had went back to work very early on into my child loss. And once I got back to work, I had an individual, and I don't even know his name. I couldn't tell you to this day. I do know it was a dude that called me, and he had lost a son too. And he just called me and said, "Hey, I just wanted to reach out to you. My name is whatever his name was." And he said, "I lost my son too." And we kind of talked briefly about it. And he said, "If you ever want to talk, I'm here." And I said, "Thank you." And, I asked him about his son's death. And I don't know, I guess I was trying to, I didn't, he was the only other person that I knew at the time that had lost a child. So I was quizzitive about, how did he lose his child, and what did he do? And if he was married, and, just different things like that. And then that was the only time that I talked to him, but it kind of made an impact on me. Just because I was like, wow, there is one more person that understands. And maybe that's where I got it from in contacting the women I did, was because I knew from that point on I wasn't alone.
Yeah. And it's interesting how just one instant like that, you know, kind of propelled you, you know,
Mm-hmm.
into knowing how it made you feel, how important it would be to these other women for you to just to reach out and let them
Mm-hmm.
they aren't alone. So let's let's talk a little bit about the book. You just recently published your book, Mama Don't Heal. Or I'm sorry, uh, Mama You Don't Heal, correct?
Yes, yeah.
And just came out this past June. It's been a huge success so far. But tell me about that process of wanting to put it down on paper. And again, for someone who's written two memoirs myself, I know how cathartic it can be when you're sitting down and reliving these experiences, but certainly not to the extent of what the trauma that you were dealing with. So um, was it almost therapeutic for you to sit down and put it on paper? And what was the inspiration behind wanting to actually publish the book in the first place?
I've always, for me, I've always been like the creator, and I always, I always like doing creative things anyway. I'll go ahead and start by that. But I can remember early on in my child loss thinking that I wanted to write a book about it. And I think for me back then, it was more of, so everybody knew my story, and knew what was going on, with me, and why I was the way I was, I guess you could say. But I held off until I started writing it when I was 10 years into my child loss, which I'm glad I did, because I know so much more now than back then I didn't know. I was still mad at the world. I was mad at God. I was mad about everything you could possibly think of. But so it was always in my mind, probably starting at around year three-ish. But I waited, and then finally it got to a point. I had a guy that I supervised. He died during COVID in 20 in July of 20. I can't remember if he died. I think it was 21. He ended up dying in 21. Maybe it was 2020. But he passed away, and obviously I helped his mother with it. And she was kind of going through the same things. And I was just like, you know what? it's time. It's time to put pen to paper and let's do this. And when I was writing it, I wanted to tell my story, but I also wanted to have things in that book that helped me to start my journey to rebuild my life. And obviously, I think I found my purpose now, but how I did it. So I wanted to write it where it told my story and it was very raw. This is exactly what I was thinking during this time. And it's very raw, it's very in your face, but I wanted to make sure that if any mother had ever felt that way, that I didn't leave something out and they think that they were weird for thinking that way, or they feel guilty, or they shouldn't be feeling that way. So I wrote it very raw. And then I also wanted it to where, hey, you need to, I say you have to read it, think it, talk about it. You have to speak it. You have to live your life, with your child as their legacy. So I put a lot of stuff in there to help them learn how to start moving forward with it. So when I was writing the book, I wanted to do both of them. I wanted to have my story in there, but I also wanted to be able to and guide these women to try to figure out where to go with their loss, especially in the first days, because you think you're totally alone. So that was kind of like the inspiration. I wanted them to know my story because I think it helps telling your story and it helps keep your child's legacy alive. But I also wanted it in a way to help them. I mean, obviously telling a story of, you're not alone is great, but I wanted more meat into it, I guess you could say. But the book isn't a long book, but I wanted more to be able to, hey, try this. And if this doesn't work, let's adjust it a little bit and let's do this. And that's kind of where the inspiration came and how I decided to work the book.
Yeah. And you mentioned multiple times throughout the podcast that you're an introvert.
Mhm.
How difficult was it for you to open yourself up and allow yourself to be so vulnerable when it's really kind of outside of your comfort zone to do that?
Yeah, so writing the book was all right because it was only me, and I can give you an introvert story. Like my husband didn't know until I sent the book to editing that I was even writing a book because I didn't want anybody to know about it. And the funny story with that, I was like, yeah, I'm writing a book, and he's like, oh, what are you writing, a children's book? Because I told him I might want to write a children's book one day. I was like, no, I wrote the story about Kaleb and how to, and how women can help themselves who've lost children. He looked at me like I was crazy, and I was like, yeah, it's in editing. But it was one of those things that I didn't want to let it go. I didn't want people to know about it. And then finally, I can still remember. Obviously, this wasn't that long ago. I can remember, you're in front of Amazon because that's where my book started from, and I'm like, all right, publish, and I finally just hit publish, and then so I did that, and I calmed down from that, and then it was a whole nother issue because I had all those my friends and family that had no idea that I just published a book, and then it was like, okay, well, I might need to tell them, and I was sitting there and I had wrote a little thing about, the book and, what I did and everything and when it was going to be published. And I can remember sitting there and I'm like, okay, publish, 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 publish. And I was like, dang it, I'm just going to do it. And I finally hit post or whatever. But it was hard because I had told my husband, I was like, now everybody knows how crazy I am. You know what I mean? Like it was like a big joke. Now everybody's gonna know how crazy I am because it was very raw and I was very open with exactly what I was feeling at the time. But yeah, it was really hard. But it's one of those things that fear will try to do to you. Fear will try to stop you from doing it. And it was one of those things that I had to push through it. And I'm so glad I did because it's helping women that I didn't think I could ever reach. And it's helping people that haven't even lost children view their life differently. And I think that's more than I expected it to be. And I'm glad I did, but fear will stop you from doing a lot of things. A lot of things.
Yeah, I love that. I love that story to just take the leap and jump out there and like I said, hit that publish button, hit that post button. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's so important to just jump out of that comfort zone and get out there, because it's, you know, it is, you know, life-changing work that that you did there. So it's great that you were able to get over that and to, you know, take that leap and get out of your shell. Are what's next? Are there more books planned? What's the future look like for June?
Yeah, so I am actually, I know of two that are going to eventually be published. After I wrote the book, I spent the next month actually doing, it's like a workbook for the book. And it's like the first 90, it's called the first 90 days. And basically it's like a kind of like a workbook. Well, I say a workbook, but it's 358 pages because like I'm like, there's so much stuff that goes into child loss. But so I did a workbook. That was my first next thing was the workbook. And basically it takes you through 90 days and it gives you each week, it gives you like a project to do to help you with your child loss. And it also is kind of like a journal because it has blank pages in there, so you could use it um, more than just doing whatever that week's project is. I say, and so that was my first thing, and I just published that I think maybe a week or two ago, and then I have two more books. One is going to be more descriptive about rebuilding your life. Obviously, it's going to be rebuilding your life from trauma, because I think everybody's trauma is different. Like my trauma is child loss, but someone could be having trauma because they lost the job of their dreams, or they got a divorce, or their spouse cheated on them. Like there's so many different things, and like to me, everybody's trauma is bad as my trauma is with child loss because it's the baddest thing that you've been through. So that I want to be more in depth about how to heal through trauma. So that's coming out. And then I just want to do one, I call it Hallmark Holidays. Just a little, just a little tiny, maybe an ebook or something like that about what to do to honor your child, because I think I always tell women, I said, the day that your child dies, the day that their legacy begins. And we choose as moms, as parents with losing a child that has lost a child, we choose to either have their legacy carry on or die that day when they died. And for me, I wanted to write something probably like an ebook. It's probably going to be an ebook. I don't think it's going to be that long because I'm not long-winded, but I think that I'm going to just, hey, here's all the Hallmark holidays. Let's talk about them. What can you do to honor your child? And then I also want to go into like kind of like a passion projects type thing. Because I know a lot of moms that have decided that after their child died, and we kind of talked about it earlier with Laura with John's Mission 22. She helps her son committed suicide, so she helps veterans that parents of veterans that children committed suicide. So I mean, there's all those moms out there, and I think moms want to do stuff, or parents want to do stuff, they just don't know what to do. So that's kind of on the horizon too.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. June, is there anything that we didn't cover that you think would be valuable to the listeners before we wrap things up?
No, I think like the biggest thing for me is always to keep pushing no matter what your trauma is, and that don't think that any trauma that you're suffering from is too little and insignificant. I think people think that, well, why is this bothering me? Why is this incident bothering me? It's the trauma to each person, and take it and try to figure it out and work on the triggers, and you can do it and you can rebuild your life. I think that's like the biggest thing for me, for anybody. And then as for mothers, you're not alone, or well, parents in general, you're not alone, and you can do it. And it's just one baby step at a time. Don't look at, I call it shiny object syndrome. Don't look at where you want to go. Look at the little baby steps it's going to take to get there, one step at a time. And don't think that you're going to get from 0 to 10 overnight. And it doesn't matter how long it takes you. It's just as long as you're working towards where you want to go.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. June, how can people find you on the internet? If anybody out there is going through child loss right now, if they want to copy the book, if they want to reach out to you about the coaching that you do, how do they find you on the internet?
Sure. I have a website. It's called theserenitydreamer.com, or you can find me at lifeafterchild.com, whichever one of those websites. They both kind of go back to the same place, but I had one and then I now I have another one. And then if you would like to jump into my Facebook group, it's for mothers who have lost children. And I did a group coaching program for a while, which is really weird because we talked about me being an introvert, but that program right now we're actually going through in my group, and that group is Women Surviving Child Loss. And you can jump in there. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of free resources in that group, and it costs nothing to get into that group. And it's just a bunch of good women in that group that whenever someone's having a bad day, I think there's 1,100 of us now, but whenever you're having a bad day, you just jump in the group and they try to help you out. They give you positive instead of the negative that we see a lot of time in these child loss groups. It's more of a positive and hey, try this, do this, and it's a really good group. And then if you're not a mom that have lost a child, I have my business page, which is the Serenity Dreamer, and there's just positive stuff for anybody on that page, trying to rebuild their life and find purpose. Because a lot of people, I don't think, know what their purpose is.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love that. June, that brings us to our final question. As you know, the subtitle of the podcast is Many Little People in Many Little Places, which comes from the opening lyrics of a Michael Franti song, Gloria, which go, when many little people in many little places do many little things and the whole world changes. So it's one of the little things that June does on a daily basis to make the world a little bit better place.
Yeah, so basically, I work with women. I work with women trying to help them with their traumas. I try to treat my daughter and treat everybody as someone special, and I try to encourage them every single day. And I volunteer at a cat rescue, trying to help animals as much as possible, and just trying to be positive when right now we're living in a really negative world. So I just try to spread encouragement that tomorrow's another day, and that's what I do. I try to encourage everybody and help people with their trauma, and obviously help animals. I volunteer.
I love that. I love that. June, I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show and open up and help listeners who may be going through the same things that you're doing. It was a great conversation. For those out there listening, be sure to check out my other podcasts and blogs at journeymymotherson.com. While you're there, pick up a copy of one of my books. And again, June, I really appreciate this. Good luck the rest of the way with the books and all the future endeavors that you're ready to take off on here. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.